Welcome everybody to the Supply Chain Special Interest Group for the Society for the Advancement of Consulting. Today we've got a panel of experts together to have a chat, I suppose, about the practical transition plans when we talk about current energy positions, reshoring, nearshoring, and our global geopolitical situation. So I'll get everybody to introduce themselves to start with. So Lisa, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Lisa Anderson, president of LMA Consulting Group, and based out of Claremont, California, and an expert in supply chain management, although working with manufacturers to help them improve their performance.
Diane.
Yep, I am Diane Garcia, based out of Phoenix, Arizona. I am president of Lorraine Consulting. And similar to Lisa, I work with manufacturing and distribution clients, really everything around supply chain management.
And Dr. Karen Wilson-Starks.
Yes, I'm Dr. Karen Wilson-Starks, president and CEO of Trans Leadership Incorporated out of Colorado Springs, Colorado. We work with large corporations, global in their scope, and we primarily work in manufacturing, also in construction, and other industries. I'm a leadership expert, so I'll be bringing a leadership lens to our conversation, and I'll also today especially be bringing a philosophical lens to our conversation.
Thank you, Karen. And I'm David Ogilvy, and I have David Ogilvy Consulting. I'm based in Brisbane, Australia, and we work with manufacturing firms and distribution companies, of course, and our specialty really is supply chain resilience and application of technology, specifically ERP systems. So we all have a particular view, I'm assuming, on the geopolitical situations at the moment. I think it would be fair to say that any supply chain around the globe at the moment has a high risk of exposure to China and the relationship between China and the rest of the world in many cases. Lisa, what is your view firstly on the situation and what companies can potentially do about it?
Well, that's a big topic there, David. Yes, well, I think that companies are at definitely a severe risk if they're dependent on China, which most are in one way or another. They may be just bringing in goods if they're a distributor, but most manufacturers, if you look back enough tiers in their supply chain, they have suppliers or suppliers that get some sort of a component or some sort of a material from China, or a place where China is looking to control. So there's a lot of risk in the supply chain because China is definitely getting rather aggressive as far as potentially invading Taiwan. They're buying up farmland, they're buying up terminals at ports, they are buying up natural resources. They basically want to dominate the world. So it's definitely in our best interest. If we want to succeed long term as a company, we need to be aware of who we're dependent upon and how reliable and sustainable that whatever we're dependent upon is, so that we can make alternate plans, innovate, etc.
Yes.
So
yes.
we can get to solutions in a bit if you'd like.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask Diane, what sort of conversations are you having with your clients around this?
Well, certainly, like Lisa mentioned, the dependency around China is somewhere in their supply chain. So whether they have a direct relationship or they're supplier, like I've had a client, not necessarily China, but related to the Ukraine and Russian crisis, where one of the tasks was around how do we secure enough nickel, because they do a lot of stainless steel kind of work. And so the conversations have been, what can we do and how do we secure the supply out of China or wherever that region may be? And then how do we start talking about transitioning and where to transition? And I mean, there's a lot of tactical steps in how to do it, but the conversation first is where to go. Yeah. Where are we and where do we go?
And Karen, what sort of view do you have on this from your perspective?
I think that we have to be very aware and very cognizant of the implications of the geopolitical landscape. And what I mean is beyond business as we normally think about it. There are costs and implications that are not financial when we think about who we have as partners. There's the question of ideology, there's the question of beliefs, the question of values, and there's some partners who share our values and some who may not. And down the line, what will be the cost sometimes in partnering with people who don't share our values? What is the cost in terms of human rights, the terms and cost of just protecting lives and just how you do business, the ethics of doing business. So I'm having more conversations, less with my clients about this issue and more with my professional association, which is consulting psychologists, which are part of the American Psychological Association, as I'm on the Consulting Psychology Ethics Committee. And as we are reviewing or APA is reviewing the ethics code, we're having to really think about what is the definition of human rights in different countries and in different geographies across the globe? And do we agree with that? Do we even agree wholeheartedly with what the UN might say? And what does it mean if we accept certain umbrella organizations without thinking through all the way to the end of what the implications might be? So when I think about geopolitical, I think we need to really proceed with eyes wide open.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that about the ethical side and that sort of thing, because I know one of my clients specifically is having a lot of problems getting good qualified people at the moment. There's a serious shortage of quality people, and that whole ethics and cultural alignment piece is becoming much more important than it used to be for them specifically, because they've had to go overseas and get workers. And the other thing I think I've seen, and I'll run around and get everybody's view in a second, is that the competition for talent has suddenly become global. It's not just your own backyard anymore. We are competing across countries for the same talent. What impacts do you think that's going to have? Karen?
Well, I think that there's an upside, first of all, that you have more options, you have more choices. There are more ways for people across the globe to work with us and our clients, meaning virtually. So there are less barriers in a sense. And it also means an extra layer of vetting. We can't assume that people from other geographical areas think the same way that we do. In fact, we ought to assume that they probably don't. And part of the upside is that they don't, because you're bringing in sort of the global diversity piece. And yet you want to be more sure on purpose about the values fit, the culture fit, and what's acceptable in some places versus others. So I think we have to explore more deeply some things that we might take for granted and issues that we might assume when we're working more in, let's say, our own country context, whatever that country may be. So I think the upside is you can get more qualified people. You can get diverse perspectives. All of that is phenomenal. And the diverse perspectives also help with global interactions and relations. So there may be geographical areas where you want to do more work, where you want to have more of a presence. And if you've got people on your team who are from some of those regions, that gives you an advantage. Downside would be you have to look more deeply and ask things that you normally might not ask and not make assumptions about what you think is the case.
Yes, yes. So Diane, what's your experience been with your clients on this?
Well, I think it's like Karen said, there's upsides, there's definitely challenges. I would say it depends. I mean, like for my clients, they're manufacturers. These positions are in person. So if you don't have the welders, if you don't have the talent of specific, processes, then you're just not going to be able to compete. So a lot of the conversations have been around the need for talent and bringing on talent and finding talent and securing talent. And then it depends on the position. There are positions where there be IT, supply chain, certain roles that can be remote. And then I think at that point, you do have to talk about this as a global supply of talent, and how do you pay and how do you secure that top talent? Because you can find some really good, resources. They just may not be where you currently have been looking. So I definitely encourage to look elsewhere and to really look for, where you can have remote positions, and then where you can't, you just have to, figure out how you attract.
And dealing with the, dealing with the bureaucratic issues around getting visas and all that sort of stuff from different countries. So Lisa, what's your experience been in this space? You're on mute, Lisa, by the way.
Oh, well, that would be a problem. Well, so I I definitely think that there's definitely a lack of talent in the manufacturing and logistics arenas globally, really. With that said, as folks are looking to reshore, nearshore, friendly shore, they need to remember the talent, because just because a country happens to be low cost and they produce some items has nothing to do with whether you're going to be able to find the appropriate types of talent that you'll need for your type of business. Yes. So it's going to be really critical talent is one of the key things to look for when you're thinking about, even if you don't reshore, you're probably just increasing your capacity. Like, let's say if you're in the US, you should be increasing your capacity in the US and surrounding areas, regardless of whether or not you're reshoring and nearshoring. The US used to be a leader in manufacturing. Now China is #1 in manufacturing, but we still have a lot of talent that, in comparison to a lot of the other countries. So, you have to be thinking about where you can grow to scale. Because, scale is going to be the really tricky piece here. Like, of course, you can produce some volume, but are you going to be able to produce what you need, especially if we're cut off from supply? These critical items that China supplies, like, they supply all sorts of things that goes into equipment for the electrical grid, that active pharmaceutical ingredients and the like. So we need to make sure that we're building capacity, and one of the pieces of capacity is labor capacity.
Yeah.
Let me throw something in, David, before you maybe comment on this topic. I was thinking about the recent NBA championship win of the Denver Nuggets. And on the Denver Nuggets team, you have Nikola Jokic, who's from Serbia. And what I find fascinating, clearly, he understands the game of basketball. He is a great player of the game of basketball. And in the US, we talk a lot about teamwork. However, what I find is that he has a deeper understanding of what that teamwork really means, and about the notion that passing the ball is really a win for at least two different team members. And the whole notion of team first over individual, I think it's been a wonderful addition to the perspective that he's bringing, which I know is coming from being in a different culture, as well as it is from being a sports professional. So it's just another example of how you can really get some bonus pieces and benefits from mixing it up, a little bit. And yet he's playing with the US and for US interest, as well as own personal interest. And that's what you want. There's someone who can do a little bit of both.
Yeah, that actually opens up a bit of a rabbit hole in many respects, because, both from a supply chain perspective and from a technology perspective, that business about teams and working together to achieve the right outcome always raises the distinction between whether you've got a team or you've got a committee. And in most organizations, they are committees. And yes. Committee, decision by committee and those sorts of things are fraught with danger, particularly with the political landscapes that exist just by their very nature in an organization. Whether it's a good political environment or a toxic one, it doesn't really matter. It's there. And so, being able to manage a committee and managing a team are two different skill sets. But that's a rabbit hole we could potentially go down. So Lisa, you mentioned, the reshoring, nearshoring, friendly shoring component. Speaking, I guess, purely from an Australian or a South Pacific type arrangement, I personally don't see that occurring in our region. I'm not sure whether it's happening in the US or not. But we've got potentially a different challenge in that our labour costs are so high, we're never going to be able to compete. We have these other issues with the supply of raw materials, as you mentioned, the supply of quality labour in these nearshoring type arrangements, whether that be Vietnam or Cambodia or those other sorts of other Asian countries and so forth. Here in Australia, I think the future of manufacturing for us is in automation. What's your view on that?
Yeah, well, I was going to bring that up earlier in the talent discussion, and then we went on a different direction. But yeah, definitely, the only successful manufacturers going forward are going to be focused on innovation and applying technologies that make sense in their case. So certainly automation, I've been hearing more about robotics and welding. I had a client that actually wasn't they used robotics, but it was for a different kind of a machine. But basically, it allowed them to produce second and third shift, lights out, without any people there, and that was really important because before they could do that, they had a backlog, and that area of their shop was causing the backlog, and it freed itself up. Now you can't automate the whole facility, but you can automate and or utilize different technologies to move forward. So I definitely think the use of technology and innovation, especially as it comes to some of the goals we're trying to achieve on the logistics side and just overall, is going to be required for long-term success. I think that short-term success is going to be fine, but really the disruptions, the risks we were talking about, and I didn't even bring up China's water, because I recently talked to a private equity person about that topic. But China is rated, according to the UN, as like the worst possible category, like the highly severe or scarce. And basically what that means is that at least their northern basin is. And so what that means is they won't have the electricity. 20% of their electricity is based, heavily on water. They won't have water to drink. That's somewhat problematic. But basically there's a whole host of issues. So as you can imagine, as things come up, whether it's political, natural resources, rare earths, whatever, if they have to prioritize, they're not going to prioritize the US over some of their other choices. So it's going to force these changes to happen, and folks need to be ready.
Yes. So Diane, are you experiencing, what are you talking to your clients about in this space?
On the automation side, I think, David, is what you're referring to. So, like Lisa mentioned, a lot of the robotics in particular clients has been evolving over time. I would say that it just depends on the process and how they can, incorporate. I think clients are trying to see how they can use it. Now it's not as fast, I think, as what they would like. and how do they get that automation up and running has been more of the concern. The one thing I was going to mention about, David, I know you mentioned you're not seeing a lot of the reshoring or nearshoring. I've seen a lot of my clients and their connection to the U.S. when it comes to Mexico, and how they have been utilizing Mexico and Mexico, labor rates, and finding secondary sources in the Mexican market. So I would say that there has been a lot of activity around that, especially because of proximity to the U.S.
Yes, I think you guys appreciate it. I've been talking about Mexico for a while from an Australian context. We traditionally look west and northwest up into Asia, and I think in some cases we should also be looking east. So that's the other way around for you guys.
Yeah, the other direction for.
I'll add a comment on this area too. With my clients, we're talking less about automation and more about innovation. And there are a couple pieces to that. I think that always there's what I call the short-term and the long-term strategy. And innovation, in some senses, is long-term because it takes a while to put all those pieces in place. Automation can be shorter term, not always. It can also be a long long-term strategy. And I find that for my clients, before they're really going to be ready to implement innovation effectively, there are some pieces they have to learn organizationally that relate to communication. And we've talked about that. Automation does not really run itself automatically, even though we would like for it to. There's a human component, there's a communication component that has to be built in. And if you're not already practicing some of those disciplines in the company today, it's very hard to bring that in automation that's even more remote and makes it more challenging and more difficult. So what I'm doing is really facilitating the success of my clients in communicating across different boundaries at a higher level and a more successful way now, so that when automation is introduced in a more great way, they already have the discipline to know what the communication and the conversation may need to be so that they get the benefit of the automation.
You actually raise a very interesting point there, Karen, because I think both Lisa and Diane and I all work in a very similar space as far as the technology piece of our business is concerned. And we all know that if you automate a messy process, you're only going to get a messy process result a lot quicker.
Yes.
So the reality is, and we've spoken about this as a panel before, I know, it brings back the importance of going back to your basics and getting your business 101 aspects right and solid, and have a really good foundation before you start taking these steps. And I think a lot of people are thinking that the innovation or the automation are a panacea, when in fact you've got to do your housekeeping and get things clean at the bottom end. Because if we're talking about more automation via use of technology, and we're using more the Internet of Things and all of that stuff, if we don't have the processes right, well, then it's just not going to work for us.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. And you also actually need people, and high skilled people to especially when it comes to technology, and innovation as well. Innovations coming up a lot on the logistics side. And one of the topics we were talking about today is regulations, which definitely affects manufacturers, but there's a lot of them on the logistics side. In California, I recently did a webinar for a group on it. So what I can tell you is, at the high level, there are 1,001 regulations, and generally speaking, they start in California and they spread throughout the U.S.
So that's all your fault.
Yeah, well, it is, although I would not take credit for these regulations. But basically, the regulations are, pretty much insane at the moment. They are just not achievable. Like, the technology does not currently exist to meet the regulation, basically. End of conversation. So it's a very depressing conversation to listen to those panels. However, on the other side, I see it is that the folks who are going to be successful are the ones who are willing to innovate, which means you have to have a culture of innovation, like Karen was saying, and developing new technologies. And actually, recently I heard something that I think is absolutely true. So on the manufacturing side, I think we are known in the US anyway for our aptitude for innovation. So I think we need to be developing new, not just logistics, but manufacturing technologies as well. It also relates to the energy transition topic. But if we can develop them and then not outsource the manufacturing of them, but keep that in-house, if you will, that'll be one path forward where we can be successful, and we don't have to worry so much about reshoring exactly. Like, we don't have to bring anything back. We just need to be producing a lot more here.
Yeah, and I suppose that's quite acute for us Australians, because a lot of the innovations out there, like Wi-Fi and all of those sorts of things, have been developed here in Australia, and we've never successfully commercialized them. And so as a country, we are quite innovative in those sorts of spaces. We invent a lot of this stuff, but we don't do anything with it. And that's a real problem. I'm just wondering if our audience has got any questions. If they'd like to drop them in the chat or something, we might be able to open the mic up for questions. But in the meantime, while we're hopefully gathering some questions, Lisa, you mentioned the new energy supplies and things like that. What impact do you think that's going to have on manufacturers, both in the short and the longer term?
Well, the one topic on a logistics panel, although many of the manufacturers would say the same thing, but maybe for a slightly different reason. But in essence, the one thing that kept them up at night was actually energy, because really without energy, not only does manufacturing doesn't run, first of all, and logistics won't move, which is the point. So if you can't make and you can't move, what are you going to do if you're in manufacturing and logistics? So there's lots of debates, obviously, and there's a lot of these regulations relate to transitioning energy to cleaner energy. However, basically, what I think about that is that we need to look at the globe. I mean, we're working together. We have a global supply chain today. That's where we stand. So really, it doesn't make any sense for us to look at the energy consumption in one small microcosm and reducing one place by we'll just use relative numbers here, but reducing one place by -10 and then increasing another 2 places by 100 does not add up to a better equation. So, we have to be careful about what we're doing here. Now we certainly need to be innovating and advancing and, creating new, energy sources, but doing this -10 plus 200 on a daily basis is not going to get us from point A to point B successfully. So that's one thing I see. And I think we have to be, we also just don't have enough to do all the things we're doing, like the charging grids and even the electrical grid. And I heard a statistic recently because I was preparing for the speech. 80% of the software that's used in the ports, as an example, is made in China. So there's all sorts of risks and cyber attacks, and who knows what else could happen. So anyway, it's a loaded topic.
Yeah, we didn't open that Pandora's box. Yes. So we do have a couple of questions. If you'd just like to unmute yourself, look forward to hearing what you have to ask.
Hi. The first question I have, you were talking a little bit earlier about ethics on doing business and the quality of the labor workforce. So I realize companies are saying, hey, ethics, quality in our labor, but can you talk about, the companies are saying this, but after a while, when you're not getting what you need, do you feel or see a sense of desperation that, hey, my standards were up here, we're just going to lower them a little bit because we really need to meet the demand, and we're just going to slide a little bit here and there, but eventually we will get back to what we really want. But right now, we need to get it out of the door right now. How do you handle that maybe sense of desperation, or how do you manage that?
So Karen, you would like to talk to that?
I do want to say something about that. First, I want to give just a personal example of it. There's a relative that I have who works for a state police department in an urban area. And what he does is automobile mechanics for the state police. In the past, they've had very robust guidelines and regulations about who they were hiring. You could not have police records of certain types, and you had to pass lie detector tests. You had to have all these character things you would pass. And because of the urban area in which this facility is located, they found so many people who are positive for drugs. They have police records, and all the things that they have in the past said were no-goes as far as this position. And one of the challenges when you're working for a police department is that there are some people who try to infiltrate police departments for the sole purpose of harming police officers, and those people often wouldn't pass these screens. And so my relative was letting me know that they had stopped using these screens, which she was deeply concerned about. in terms of who would be allowed in. I think this is a time to become more creative and more innovative rather than to lower the standards, because the risk factors are so high when you let the fox into the hen house. I mean, that's essentially what it is. And so I think you bring up a great point, Erica, that it's not that simple. It's not that easy. And when it's hard, that doesn't mean you lower the standards. The standards are there for a good reason. You begin to think about even, I tell you what the, I'll call them national security type agencies and other entities do, is they start grooming people at a very young age. And they start reaching out to them and making them aware of the career opportunities and preparing them and getting them prepped earlier so that, and then they take them in early before they've done all this crazy stuff in their lives so that they can really pass the test. And I think more organizations are going to have to think about that. How do we go to younger and younger people, let them know about us and grow our own in advance?
And governments too, Karen, because there's, I don't know about your country, but in ours, there's been a real force towards pushing people down the university road. And we now have this massive shortage of tradespeople.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yes,
that's definitely the case, I think globally, really.
Yeah.
Which is
Lisa, Diane, did you want to address Erica's question?
Well, the
sorry,
only
go
thing
ahead,
I'd say is it's like a constant challenge with clients. I think, how do you support the forecast and the demand that you have in front of you, and then do that with a strategy to know that you can eventually, change course, or, how do you like do the tactics along with the strategy? But I would say it's just a constant challenge in making sure that where do you like grow, but at the same time, you have to make sure your priorities stay to satisfy customer demand. And how do you secure, the future, knowing that you have, X amount of other priorities that are going on every day. It's a pretty constant challenge, I would say. I don't know if I've mastered it or our clients have mastered it, but
I think
Lisa?
they probably haven't.
yeah, I would agree. It's quite the challenge, because there's we have clients that they're pushing the envelope, if you will, because of cost considerations, or they're looking at additional places they can outsource, because they're trying to drive to certain growth goals as well as cost goals. So it is quite the challenge. I mean, to some degree, that's why I was speaking with a group of CPA partners today, and I was saying, we're going to have to do more investment if we want to be able to just survive, really, through the next period of time here, because we're going to need to be ready to take on volume. If not, you can survive for a while, but you'll probably go out of business as the first disruption occurs.
Yes.
And as the first conflict happens, really, because I mean, after all, we do ridiculous things already. I mean, we source all sorts of things from China with the child labor laws, and yet we are like, oh, yeah, how great we're doing, because we, I don't know, we drive an electric car or whatever. Who knows what the deal is? But basically, no one really is paying attention to, like, what are all those steps in the supply chain? What does this all add up to being? And it's not the consumer's responsibility, but it's just a challenge, really. How do you do all this plus your day job?
yeah,
I guess my view on that, Erica, is similar to Diane's. Is once you start to slip on your standards, the standards are there for a reason. And you should always be trying to improve on those standards, not let them slip. So if the business is under pressure and letting standards slip is the answer, then we're asking the wrong questions, in my opinion. We need to be looking then, as Diane mentioned, at what is our capacity, what are our forecasts, and we may need to be less busy. Let's do what we do and do it well, and maintain the standard within the quality capabilities that we have, and then grow from that perspective rather than allow the standards to slip. That would be my thoughts.
Well, and we've been working with clients lately where we look at customer profitability, product profitability. Why are we jumping through hoops and lowering standards and who knows what in order to satisfy an unprofitable customer that
Correct.
doesn't appreciate you or whatever. So, you know, like we're definitely working with clients on that end. And actually, even from a consulting point of view, you know, we have to question clients that we know are going to suck up all sorts of time and energy for not necessarily a very substantial results, because it's, you know, there's only so much of us to go around, if you will.
Yes. And like, I mean, that comes back to focus, doesn't it? Like, I mean, what are you focusing on? What are you measuring in your business? If you are solely measuring revenue, well, then you will let those standards slip because you need the revenue, because that's what you're focusing on. Whereas if you're focusing on quality and profitability, that will come from maintaining your standards.
You know, I also think we have to remember the power of casting vision for what, you know, companies are doing. If you paint the picture in the right way about the real reason that the company does what it's doing and the real impact that it has on the marketplace, what's the value that you're bringing, you're going to attract people who are attracted to that vision and to that mission and to the way in which the company is doing that. And I think sometimes companies forget the vision piece and they just focus on, okay, we have a task, we need a warm body to do X, but really the warm body you want is going to connect with the vision that you have. And that, you know, speaks to some of the how and what's important. And I think we have to double down on that in this time to get the right people.
I was going to mention that wonderful. Thank you so much for your responses. It really led into my next question about, we're talking about the focus, the vision of the business. And I was just wondering, for your own businesses, what were you surprised about and how you had to change in your business, your focus, due to, say, innovation, automation, things that companies are going through right now?
Wow, that's a really good question. Go ahead.
It is. I was going to say, one of the things that I'm dealing with my clients is them helping the people in their organization to realize that the landscape out there has changed in some significant ways. And the way in which they've done business in the past is really not going to work going forward. And that's interesting because there are some people in organizations that have a mindset that's kind of a stuck mindset. They don't want to change. They don't want to do anything different. And they don't have the vision for what's possible. And it's really difficult because my clients are having to figure out new ways to paint that vision and also to put some accountability measures in place so that therefore they can have the conversation about, here's what we need in this climate right now. Here's what we're looking for. And people are having to, in a sense, sign up again for, do I want to do that? Do I want to stay here? And if not, then the company also has to start, I'll say, searching for some other kind of talent, because the old way is not going to work.
Diane?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Erica. I would say lately, when it comes to the vision of my company, or how do I proceed knowing everything that's been going on in 2023, it's something Lisa mentioned earlier. Like, you really have to focus on how to scale. We can't be stuck, doing the same tasks and never being able to scale, because otherwise we're just not going to be successful. And given, the amount of clients who also are out there needing supply chain help, and, however that need looks, there is plenty out there. So it's really all about how do you scale? What tools am I using? Like, how do I capture, if I'm working through a project with a client, how do I capture that information and kind of use it going forward for a more standardized method? So it's constant on the scaling of the company.
Lisa?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's it is really the challenge, is how can we do more with less, if you will. That's really one of the main things. And the other thing is that's happened over the last several years, largely stemming from the pandemic, is that the virtual capabilities have come a long way. And so it's how do you, again, utilize different technologies. It's not all about technology, but technologies, processes, how do you outsource other resources? So I've brought in some additional resources as well as leveraging some that I've used all along, but to a greater degree. So like, for example, I have a data analyst that comes in handy in almost every project now, because you know what project doesn't need to figure out what's going on with the data. And then recently started looking at or working with a research person, which is helpful to have, because if you need to look into a topic, you can do a deep dive quickly. So there's different resources that, you know, been looking into how to bring into projects as well.
Yeah, and from my business perspective, I guess I've been satisfied being a one-man band for a very long time, and about 2 years ago I made the decision to start to scale, and that had to make me start to think differently about how we approach things, how I communicated things across a broader range of people than just myself, and those sorts of things. So I've started to make some use of some of the new AI tools that are out there. That's helped me a lot with some of our meeting notes and all of those sorts of things. And leveraging different software and technology things. But to Lisa's point, it's not about necessarily just technology. I've not been able to find the people I need in the marketplace to help me how I need them, so I'm starting to train them. So I've got 2 of my contractors at the moment. I've picked up from people I've worked with on projects, and they've subsequently left that organisation, and so we've started the conversation and we work together in that phase now. So that's how I'm doing that.
Oh, I completely agree. I've always collected, if you will, good people, and I think that's the key. I mean, after all, there's so few, there's just so few resources, especially these days. I think, especially since the pandemic, just because there's so much talent that retired or changed jobs or something. It's really quite challenging.
It's also meant tailoring some of the services a little to their strengths, because their strengths are really a little bit different to mine, and it's about tailoring what you actually deliver to clients, so we make the best use of those strengths. But folks, we've unfortunately run out of time as per usual. It's been a really good conversation. I want to thank Erica for your questions, and I want to thank the guests who didn't ask any questions for coming along and having a listen. Before we quickly wrap it up, do you have any final thoughts, each of you, on how some advice for listeners about how they might be able to approach these challenges we've got? And Lisa, we start with you.
Sure. So I think we have to continue to be resilient, but resilience alone will not cut it. So we have to be resilient plus innovative, and we need to be looking forward, which means we have to be brave, because weak leaders are just not going to cut it anymore. So we're going to have to be willing to take the risk moving forward, and of course, we have to make educated risk assessments on the fly.
Yeah. Diane.
Well, I think I'll leave with a little practical advice when it comes to transitions and talent, and using all this remote technology that we've incorporated in the last few years. Lisa made me think about it right at the end here, which is that Trello has been a very useful tool when it comes to working with different teams and remote teams around the globe. So I would recommend that if anyone's listening, check out that tool, because it's very useful.
Yes, it is. Karen.
A couple thoughts in closing. One is, I think what happens that's helpful in challenging times is to be proactive more than reactive. In my own business, I have been through many downturns, whether it be 9/11, the 2008 crisis here in the United States, the pandemic. And what I've learned in each one, and really doubled down on in the pandemic, was being proactive rather than sitting around waiting to see what was going to happen and then reacting. You're going to be in a better position if you can think in the crisis, where do I want to be? Where do I want to go? Decide that what, and go after it right from the beginning. And I've had a couple of years to put in place the new thing. And I've been teaching my clients how to do the same so that they're ahead of the curve instead of behind. So that's one thing I would say, proactive more than reactive. The second thing I would say, and this is about the energy piece. Right now, I just got back from a trip and I rented a car and they were renting electric cars. I didn't dare rent an electric car. I knew the urban area where I was going probably wouldn't have any electric filling facilities, but just for fun, I decided to look around to see. I saw no electric filling stations, but we have electric cars. So in many ways, we're getting the cart before the horse on energy. And I would say we need to count the cost in advance, really look at all the pieces step by step downstream and say, if we want to use more electricity, what will that really look like? What will that really cost? Is this feasible? Is it possible? Might it not be more useful to have multiple sources of energy for a long term? And before you start renting out electric cars, shouldn't you have some electric filling areas available? So that's my word, is be sensible and don't get the cart before the horse.
Totally agree with you.
We're talking about governments here, Karen. I don't think being sensible is part of their DNA, but never mind. Thank you again, everybody, for your thoughts, and we would ask the audience if you wouldn't mind to spread the word about the supply chain special interest group for the Society for Advancement of Consulting. You know, we're here to help everybody, and the more people that know about this organisation, the better. So, on that note, I'll thank you again for your time and everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is the recording off?
It's still